Picture this. It's 2015. You are a mid-level engineer at the most prestigious car company on the planet. You have a PhD. You drive a beautiful diesel. You tell people at dinner parties you work at Volkswagen, and they actually look impressed. And then, one Tuesday morning, your phone rings. It's the EPA. Engineering isn't just a career in Germany. It's a religion. The Holy Trinity, precision, tolerance, power. And for 80 years, Volkswagen wasn't just a car company. It was the high priest of that faith. To own a VW was to own a piece of German certainty. A machine built by people who considered a 1 mm error a moral failing. By 2014, Volkswagen had done the impossible. They were on the verge of becoming the largest automaker on the planet, and they'd done it by claiming to have solved a problem that physicists said couldn't be solved: clean diesel. Let that land. For decades, diesel was the dirty fuel, the engine of tugboats and tractor-trailers. It smelled like a truck stop and looked like a rolling storm cloud. But VW's TDI engine? It promised a miracle: the torque of a freight train, the fuel economy of a hybrid. Emissions so clean, they literally marketed it as mountain breeze, fresh. It was the thinking man's car. It was for people who wanted to save the planet and still enjoy the left lane. It was brilliant. It was revolutionary. It was a $33 billion lie. On September 18th, 2015, the EPA didn't just find a mechanical fault. They uncovered a premeditated algorithmic conspiracy. Not a glitch. Not a rounding error. A piece of code, deliberately written, designed to sniff out a government regulator and lie to its face. This is the story of how the world's most respected engineering company built the world's most sophisticated cheat. How a culture of impossible perfection inevitably produced the perfect crime. And how a couple of researchers from West Virginia, with zip ties and duct tape, took them down. To understand why Volkswagen lied in 2015, you have to understand where they came from. And it is not a comfortable story. Volkswagen literally means the people's car. But in 1937, the people were living under the swastika, and the car was a propaganda weapon. This was Hitler's personal obsession, not a product, not a business venture, a moving billboard for the Third Reich. His demands were frankly insane. Carry 5 people, hit 100 kilometers per hour on the Autobahn, and cost less than 990 Reichsmarks, roughly the price of a small motorcycle. To pull off this miracle, he called Ferdinand Piëch, a genuine genius. Also, a man with, let's call it, spectacular moral flexibility. Piëch didn't see a dictator. He saw a blank check. His design was elegant. Ditch the radiator, air-cooled engine in the back, curved aerodynamic shell. Efficient, clever, iconic. And then came the first great Volkswagen lie. To fund the factory, the government launched a savings stamp program. Millions of ordinary German workers, waiters, clerks, coal miners, handed over 5 Reichsmarks a week. They pasted stamps into little booklets, dreaming of their car. Not one of them ever got it. The moment the factory gears turned, the Beetle blueprints were swept off the tables. What came out instead? The Kubelwagen, Germany's Jeep, and the V1 flying bomb. The workers' savings hadn't bought them a family car. They had funded a war machine. By 1945, the factory was rubble. The dream was ash. The Beetle should have died right there. Enter one British Army major named Ivan Hurst, sent to oversee the factory's demolition. Hearst finds a single dust-covered beetle that somehow survived the bombing. And instead of scrapping it, he does something no one expected. He clears the debris, convinces the British military to order 20,000 units, and makes a decision that changes the world. The world doesn't need another weapon. It needs a way to get home. So, how do you sell a Nazi-designed car to a world that just survived the Blitz? In 1950? You can't. The first Beetles to arrive in America were met with cold silence. They were small, they were loud, and they were the brainchild of the most hated regime in human history. But here's what VW did next. And this is genuinely one of the greatest moves in marketing history. They didn't deny their flaws. They didn't rebrand. They didn't hire a celebrity. They hired an ad agency called DDB, and they told the truth. While Detroit was churning out chrome-plated land yachts, massive gas-guzzling monsters with fins like sharks, Volkswagen ran an ad with a tiny car sitting in a huge white space. The headline? Think small. They ran another ad showing a slightly scratched car with the headline, Lemon, explaining that a VW inspector had rejected it because of a blemish on the glovebox chrome, and so they scrapped the whole car. Suddenly, the Beetle wasn't a Nazi relic, it was a protest. It became the anti-status symbol. A Cadillac said you were the man. A Beetle said you were a rebel. It was the car of Woodstock, of Berkeley, of every student who realized a car didn't have to be a mansion on wheels. The people's car was finally for the people. And then, February 17th, 1972, a Blue Beetle rolls off the line in Wolfsburg, number 15,007,034. With that one car, the Bug officially dethroned the Ford Model T as the most produced vehicle in human history. They had done the impossible, scrubbed the blood off their history, and replaced it with flower power. But success does something to a company. The underdog becomes the giant, and the giant gets hungry. And what do giants do when they need a new kind of power? They find themselves a new kind of emperor. Ferdinand Piëch didn't run Volkswagen, he ruled it. As the grandson of Ferdinand Porsche himself, he viewed VW as his birthright. But inspiration, warmth, collaboration, that wasn't his style. Piëch ran the company through fear. He could reportedly detect a 0.1 millimeter vibration through a steering wheel. He once fired a quality control chief, on the spot in front of everyone, because a glove box didn't close with the correct, expensive-sounding thud. Not a safety risk, not a mechanical failure. The wrong sound? Under Piëch, the word, impossible, was a career-ending offense. And then, he did something that would make a Game of Thrones writer blush. In 2008, while the global economy was melting down, Piëch's own family, the Porsche side, tried to pull off a hostile takeover of Volkswagen. A family civil war played out in billions of euros. Piëch was 3 steps ahead. He orchestrated a short squeeze so savage it sent Porsche's stock into orbit and their bank accounts into the ground. Then, in the coldest Uno reverse in corporate history, he used Volkswagen to swallow Porsche whole. He had defeated his own bloodline. When Piëch finally stepped back, his hand-picked successor, Martin Winterkorn, kept the fear alive. Winterkorn walked the factory floor with a silver micrometer tucked in his suit pocket like a concealed weapon. He would stop at random cars, measure panel gaps. If something was 0.5 millimeters off, the width of a fingernail, engineers would be screamed at in front of their colleagues until they were physically shaking. This This is the environment that produced Dieselgate. In a culture where a loose piece of plastic gets you publicly crucified, you do not walk into the boardroom and say, "The laws of physics are in our way." You don't fix the engine to fit the world. You fix the data to fit the emperor. By 2006, VW's engineers were in an impossible situation. The US EPA had tightened nitrogen oxide limits. NOx is nasty stuff. It creates smog, triggers asthma, causes lung disease, and diesel engines produce a lot of it. To clean it properly, VW's engines needed a large tank of AdBlue, a liquid urea solution that chemically scrubs the exhaust. But a tank big enough to actually work? It would eat into boot space, ruin the design, and it would need refilling every few thousand miles, destroying the brand's promise of low maintenance. The board wanted clean. They refused to pay for clean. So the engineers stopped being mechanics. They became hackers. What they built was called internally the acoustic condition. The rest of the world would eventually call it the most infamous defeat device in history. Here's how it worked. And this is genuinely diabolical. The code sat silently inside the car's brain, constantly monitoring the environment. Steering wheel angle, barometric pressure. Wheel spin patterns. It was looking for one very specific scenario, a government emissions test. During a lab test, a car sits on a rolling dyno. Wheels spinning, steering wheel not moving. Hood open. Static air. The moment the code detected those conditions, it flipped a switch. Map A compliance mode. Every filter, every scrubber, every drop of AdBlue running at 100%. The exhaust was clean. The car passed every single time. But the second you drove off the lot, turned the wheel, hit a gust of wind, accelerate onto a motorway, the code flipped back. Map B, real-world mode. Emission systems, off. Engine breathing fire. Performance, exactly as advertised. Fuel economy, spectacular. And nitrogen oxide pouring into the atmosphere at up to 40 times the legal limit. 11 million cars. Years of deception. Not one warning light. Not one extra AdBlue refill. The perfect crime. There was just one problem. The engineers were so arrogant, so certain, so German about their solution, they made a fatal assumption. They assumed the regulators would never leave the lab. Enter a tiny, underfunded research team from West Virginia University. No massive facility, no government budget. Just a portable emissions device, a PEMS, that looked like a high school science project. They strapped it to a trailer hitch with zip ties and duct tape. And they drove a VW Jetta 1,500 miles across the American West. The car had been built to lie to a stationary computer. Nobody told it to lie to the open road. When the researchers looked at their data, they didn't see a miracle. They saw a monster. September 18th, 2015. The EPA issues a notice of violation. In bureaucratic language, it sounds like a parking ticket. In the real world, it was an execution warrant. Within 48 hours, Volkswagen's stock didn't dip. It plummeted. $30 billion in shareholder value gone in a single trading session. Across America, drone cameras captured something haunting. Tens of thousands of nearly new Volkswagens sitting in silent, geometric rows across empty lots. Sun-bleached fields, industrial wastelands, guarded by chain-link fences, untouchable, unsellable, not scrap metal, near-perfect machines, rendered radioactive by 12 lines of dishonest code. The numbers were staggering. $33 billion in fines, settlements, and buybacks. More than the entire annual GDP of some countries. And then came the handcuffs. Martin Winterkorn, the man with the micrometer, resigned within days, claiming he was stunned by the misconduct. The world was not buying it. Engineers were arrested. Executives were intercepted by the FBI at airports. One received a 7-year prison sentence in the United States. The high priests of engineering were standing in the wreckage of their own cathedral. To survive, they would have to do something they had never once considered. They would have to kill the engine. How do you fix a reputation that was poisoned by its own exhaust? Volkswagen's answer was as radical as it was expensive. You kill the combustion engine, not pivot, not tweak. Scorched earth their own history. An $86 billion bet on electric mobility. The most expensive apology in corporate history. They launched the ID series. Clean, minimalist EVs that looked like they'd been designed by a Silicon Valley startup. And they reached back into their past for the ID Buzz, an electric reimagining of the classic hippie van. Flower power for the 21st century. A deliberate reminder. This is who we were before the emperors took over. But the transition has been brutal. Going from a mechanical company to a software company isn't a pivot. It's an amputation. Reports of massive software bugs, delayed launches, internal chaos. The ghost in the machine didn't disappear. It just changed form. VW has committed to full carbon neutrality by 2050. They're opening their electric platforms to rivals, pouring billions into charging infrastructure. They are trying, very publicly, very expensively, to outrun their past. Slow down. Let this breathe. The story of Volkswagen isn't really about cars. It's about what happens when the pressure to win becomes more important than the truth. What happens when perfection is so demanded, so weaponized, that impossible becomes a firing offense? Because nobody decided one morning to commit the largest automotive fraud in history. It happened incrementally. In a culture where failure wasn't tolerated, where the answer was always yes, where the gap between what was promised and what was possible was quietly, carefully, algorithmically bridged. The new VW logo tells the story of their penance. No longer chrome, no longer 3D and heavy. Flat, simple, transparent. A visual promise that there's nothing left to hide. But here's the thing about trust. You cannot engineer it. You cannot code it. You cannot announce it in a press conference or purchase it in a $33 billion settlement. Trust is earned at walking pace in the real world when nobody, not even a censor, is watching. Volkswagen spent 80 years building a reputation for German certainty and 10 years burning it to the ground. Now they're building something new from the ashes, betting $86 billion that we'll forget the acoustic condition and remember the people's car. Whether they deserve that, that's up to us. Because technology moves at the speed of light, but the human heart moves much, much slower. And for the ghost in the machine, the road to redemption is always uphill. If you made it this far, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments. Do you think Volkswagen can actually earn that trust back? Or is Dieselgate the thing they never fully escape? See you in the next one.